Are you ready for a scary story? The unsolved murder of Catherine Hutchinson. Found on a railway line with her neck placed on the track, so if a train came it would decapitate her. But the killer made a big mistake doing this, which we'll get to later. This took place in 1953 in Lemington, a small working-class village about 4 miles west of Newcastle upon Tyne, in the north of England. The main industry was coal, and the area was crisscrossed with railway lines. Catherine lived in an area of Lemington referred to as the Pit Cottages. These were over a railway bridge at the far west of the village, just before the mine and pit heap, which was a giant pile of colliery waste which resembled a pyramid. Catherine was described by the police as a woman of loose morals. This was the 1950s, and I think just drinking a beer or having any sense of independence was probably considered loose morals. Anyhow, she was 46, married, and had a 17-year-old son. On the night of her murder, she, her son, and her husband all went out separately. Her son went to the cinema, her husband went to Throckley, a village about 2 miles west, and Catherine hit the Lemington nightlife. This consisted of the Lemington Hotel, the Tyne Iron Hotel, or as the locals called it, the Hairy Man, and the Riverview Cafe. What we know next is that by 8 p.m. she was at the Hairy Man pub, where she was met by 2 female friends. At 9 p.m. she briefly left the pub with a friend and visited the Lemington Hotel. They then returned to the Hairy Man pub at about 9:15, where they were joined by 2 brothers. The police also noted that the 2 brothers were of loose moral character too. One of these brothers had a bag containing 2 bottles of beer. The group were then heard to arrange to meet later at the Riverview Cafe after the pubs closed, which was after 10 p.m. So, as arranged, shortly after 10 p.m, they met at the Riverview Cafe. By this time, the same brother had now acquired a bottle of whiskey, which he said was for a sick relative. Now at this point, they were joined by a 3rd man, a labourer who was employed nearby. This man was said to be drunk upon arrival, and he was also carrying 2 bottles of beer. They had some tea, or maybe coffee, and then Catherine's 2 female friends, along with the 2 brothers, left the Riverview Cafe. The brothers were said to have then recognised a 17-year-old girl outside the cafe, and after asking if her mother was at home, they then decided to go with the girl. At this point, Catherine was said to start speaking to the labourer. Witnesses said Catherine referred to him by name, and they seemed to know each other. Shortly after, they were said to have left the cafe together. They were then seen outside the cafe, crossing a railway bridge by 2 more witnesses. One of these witnesses noticed that the man had an incorrectly attached collar. They then went along Lorraine Terrace, heading towards Catherine's house at the Pit Cottages. They were then seen by 2 more witnesses at Tynevale Terrace. Again, the witness noticed the man's collar. At this point in the journey, the road bridge crosses the railway lines towards Catherine's home. The witnesses said that they seemed to be having a heated discussion, with Catherine heard to be saying, give me a minute," several times. Near the bridge was a path which ran up alongside the railway going north to cornfields. It would seem rather than take the road bridge, they instead walked up this path. We know this because a man coming back from his allotment noticed 2 people walking up the track who seemed to match their description. This witness said they seemed to be trying to avoid him. The last witness was a miner who heard people talking in the cornfield near the track while he was walking to his night shift job. Catherine's house was about 300 yards from this location, and her son, who had been to the cinema, was in the house when his father came in, at about 11:35 it was estimated. He then asked his son where Catherine was, and he told him that she was not at home. The son went to bed, but the dad stayed awake, waiting for Catherine. He twice went out the house in the night looking for her, but at 6:30 a.m. he finally lay down on the sofa and slept for a while. Catherine had still not returned. He slept a little more until 8:30 a.m, and then at about 11 a.m, 29th of June, 1953, he notified the police that she was missing. Investigation. Catherine Hutchinson's body was discovered later that day at about 2:50 p.m. by 3 miners that had been crossing the railway footbridge. As they were doing so, they saw a bundle lying on the railway line, and they went over to investigate and found that it was a body. They called the police, who upon arrival found that her body had been laying on the line with the neck over one of the rails. But no train had hit her, as what the killer didn't realise was the colliery which used the line was on holiday from that day for a week. When the police investigated her body, they noticed marks of apparent bruising on her neck, so a pathologist was called and the body wasn't moved. At this point, the police began to investigate the surrounding area. Almost immediately, they found a flattened clearing in the cornfield. Catherine's underwear was found here, as well as 2 bottles of beer. It was noticed that the bottles of beer were labelled the Lemington Hotel. The police followed the track further into the field and found Catherine's handbag, skirt, a button, 4 two-penny bus tickets, part of her stocking, and a piece of skirting material. The police found that her handbag seemed intact and it appeared that no money had been taken from her. The button was determined to have come from Catherine's skirt. From that space onwards through the field towards the railway line, there seemed to be only a single track, but there were 2 other spaces in the cornfield that had been flattened down, although these were considerably smaller than the first 2. Catherine's left shoe was found at a point about 40 feet from the west side of the field. There were some upright iron railings that separated the field from the footpath that ran alongside the railway line, and on top of one of these upright rails, the police found a 1/4-inch square fragment of Catherine's coat. The police theorised that Catherine had gone into the field to have sex and had been disturbed, and thus they had moved further into the field. It's possible that the witness that came forward, who was the miner walking to work, is the person that disturbed them. It was suggested that Catherine's body had been carried from the second flattened space to the railway, and that the 2 smaller spaces in the cornfield were points at which the killer had laid her body down because he had been tired or because he'd heard somebody approaching. The police said it appeared that Catherine Hutchinson's body had been lifted over the footpath railings. The police said that it then appeared that Catherine's body was thrown over the hedge and her neck placed on the track. When Catherine's body was examined, it was found that she had a fractured nose, which was believed to have been caused before death, and a considerable pockmark on her face, which was thought to have been caused when being either thrown over the fence or over the hedge. The autopsy also confirmed the cause of death was strangulation. Suspects. The 2 brothers that Catherine was drinking with at the Hairy Man were the first to be investigated. They explained that they did indeed drink with her, and meet up with her again later at the Riverview Cafe. These brothers then said that they left the cafe with a 17-year-old girl that they met, and went back to her house, where one of them had slept with her mother. The 2 bottles of beer these men had with them were found in the girl's house, and both women confirmed the story. They were eliminated as suspects. The second suspect investigated was the labourer. He was named as Steve O'Connor, 33. He was employed constructing the new power station in Lemington. Steve's moral character was placed in the police report in the same category as other people that Catherine had been associating with, i.e., of dubious moral value. He had 3 children with his wife before they were married, and they were all mentally handicapped and were in a children's home. His wife was described as an apathetic slattern who had little interest or knowledge in her husband's comings and goings. They had an elderly couple as subtenants in their house who occupied the upstairs. The elderly woman was a part-time charwoman. I had to look this up. It means a cleaner. And she worked at the Lemington Hotel. The police investigation found that Steve had been drinking in the Lemington Hotel until 3 p.m, after which he had gone gambling in Throckley, where he appeared to have lost most of his money. At 7 p.m, he was back in the Lemington Hotel, where he was joined by 3 other men. It was said that one of these men bought most of Steve's drinks that night. By closing time, Steve had obtained 2 bottles of pale ale, which were bought for him by this same man. While all men were drunk, staff at the Lemington Hotel were sure that Steve took the 2 bottles of beer with him, and had been wearing a brown suit, brown shoes, white shirt and collar, and had neither a hat nor overcoat on. It was said that after leaving the Lemington Hotel, Steve then proceeded to the Riverview Cafe, and the other men went home. The police report stated that there seemed to have been a continuous coming and going at the cafe, but that it was quite evident that Catherine Hutchinson was in the cafe when Steve arrived, and it was said that they had spoken to each other. They then left together at about 11 p.m. A woman noted that when they left, Catherine said to Steve, "Come on, Steve," referring to him by his name. Also, Steve was heard to say, "It's lost no time since I got it." She said that Steve didn't appear to address this remark to anyone in particular, and said that she got the impression that he was acting big and clever, indicating that he was continually being engaged in sex and was going out with Catherine Hutchinson for that purpose. It was also stated by two women that had seen Steve leave the Riverview Cafe that he had 2 bottles of beer in his pockets. 2 witnesses said that they saw him leave together at 11 p.m, as this coincided with a programme starting on the radio inside the cafe. The police went to interview Steve at his place of employment at 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 1st of July 1953. He agreed to go to the Newburn police station with them and was taken by car, arriving at 2:15 p.m. He then gave a concise account of his movements from the time he left his house to go to the Lemington Hotel at 7 p.m, until he returned at, he said, 11:20 p.m. He also said that he did have 2 bottles of beer, but that he had given these to Catherine outside the cafe, and then she had left, and that the people that identified him walking with her were simply mistaken. As his account did not agree with statements by my other witnesses, he was closely questioned as to the accuracy of his statement, but he stuck to his story, and he made a written statement which matched his verbal account. Whilst the labourer was being interviewed, a police inspector had gone to his house in Store Street to interview his wife. In her statement, she said her husband came home sometime between 12 midnight and 12:30 a.m. It was noted that Steve had said he had been home by 11:20. He claimed that the clock in his house was fast, and this explained the discrepancy. When the police questioned the subtenants of his house, the people that lived upstairs, they said that they had gone to bed at 11:30 p.m, and he had not arrived by then. It was then noted by 2 other witnesses that they heard the sound of footsteps running along the street around midnight. When the police carried out door-to-door inquiries about these footsteps, including going along Store Street and interviewing every resident, they failed to reveal that anyone else was responsible for this and that the person could only have been Steve. When the labourer gave his statement at the police station, the police asked him whether he had any objection to them taking his suit that he had been wearing on the Sunday away for examination, and he made no objection to this, handed it over to them. It was noted that when they were handed over, the jacket and trousers were damp. Police decided that Steve's story was simply not credible, and that numerous witnesses contradicted what he told the police. It was the opinion of the police that Steve had gone with Catherine to the cornfield, killed her, and left the 2 bottles of beer behind in a panic. Furthermore, her forensic report found fibres on Steve's suit which had come from Catherine Hutchinson's dress. On Thursday the 14th of July 1953, at 11:34 a.m, Steve O'Connor was arrested for the murder of Catherine Hutchinson. During his arrest, police noted that the clock Steve claimed to have been running fast was in fact on this day running 2 minutes slow. Trial. The trial took place on August 3rd, 1953, at the Moot Hall in Newcastle upon Tyne, less than a month after Steve's arrest. The prosecution, while presenting all the evidence we've heard here, also, somewhat bizarrely, said perhaps Steve didn't mean to kill Catherine, and it may have been a sex game gone wrong. Then, a bombshell. The jury stopped the trial after hearing this evidence, without even hearing the defence, and discharged Steve with a formal not guilty verdict. A roar went up in the court from his friends, and Steve ran into his wife's arms as he was led out. The judge then warned anyone accusing Catherine's husband of the murder would be brought before him and severely dealt with, as he was sure her husband had nothing to do with it. Aftermath. Steve held 2 big parties in both the Lemington Hotel and the Hairy Man for him and his friends. It's not recorded what Catherine's family made of this, but there is one final story I have from a Lemington resident who remembers the incident quite well. When he was a child, he had an encounter with Steve, and I'll read it as follows. I remember one dark winter's night in Lemington when I was visiting a couple of friends, and we saw the bloke who was suspected, and we called out, "Murderer!" He gave chase to us, shouting, "Wait till I get my hands on you, little bastards. You'll be the next ones killed." Luckily, we were young, and fitness was on our side, and we managed to get away from him. Yeah, it does seem that the consensus in Lemington was that Steve had just got lucky in court and was in fact guilty. Nobody else was ever arrested for Catherine's murder, and the case went cold, and remains so to this day. Thank you for listening to this story. I volunteer at the library archive in Newcastle, and we have access to a lot of interesting unsolved crimes in the northeast area. And I'd like to record lots more of them. If you would be kind enough to subscribe and give me suggestions in the comments, I will try and cover any cases that you may know of. Ideally, I'm looking for cases that haven't already been covered on YouTube, and would really like to get into some sort of lesser known ones and interesting sort of Northern England cases. So hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.